We are going to now have two panels on the concept of cybersecurity. As we've been talking about all things grid modernization and increased availability and use of data, increased digitization of the distribution grid, we have undoubtedly heard on a number of occasions concerns associated with cybersecurity. And so we are very happy to have two panels this afternoon that will talk about cybersecurity from varied perspectives. Our first panel is going to be will be perspectives from our distribution utilities. So with us today we have Scott Hipkins, who's the Director of Security and Infrastructure Operations from FirstEnergy. We have Jeff Fuller, Director, Infrastructure Security of AES, and Stan Partlow, Vice President and Chief Security Officer from AEP. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We typically go in order of how folks are listed. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes.
Okay, Scott, go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I am Scott Hipkins from FirstEnergy, Director of Security and Infrastructure Operations. I'd like to start by thanking the Commission for the opportunity to speak to you about cybersecurity today. Utilities have a great responsibility to maintain the reliability of electric transmission and distribution systems, and cybersecurity is a key component of the protections that are needed to ensure that very reliability. Effective cybersecurity requires a comprehensive program. There is no silver bullet solution, a single tool that you can put in place that will provide end-to-end effective cybersecurity. Typically, an organization will rely on a framework. There's a diagram on the slide in front of you that represents the NIST cybersecurity framework, and that, as you can see from the components there, helps an organization create a program that will identify and protect its critical assets, as well as detect, respond, and recover from cybersecurity events. I'm going to walk through an overview of FirstEnergy's cybersecurity program over the next several slides, and I ask that you make notes of any questions that you come up with along the way. So FirstEnergy has a very mature and robust cybersecurity program that is supported from the Chief Executive Officer all the way down through our organization. We report on cybersecurity topics at least twice a year to the Board of Directors. They have been very engaged in our cybersecurity program, reviewing even some of the technical controls that we have in place for detecting potential cybersecurity events on our systems. The cybersecurity organization's mission is to ensure that FE utilizes people, process, technologies, and innovation to effectively and efficiently prevent, detect, and mitigate any cyber, physical, as well as operational technology security incidents. The cybersecurity organization is composed of 3 groups, and each one of those teams has a specific scope of responsibility for protecting FirstEnergy systems. As you can imagine, many groups across the enterprise also play key roles in implementing and maintaining a cybersecure posture. System administrators for servers, as an example, have to work in conjunction with our cybersecurity team to ensure the security of our applications and data as it pertains to potential attackers on our systems. FirstEnergy conducts monthly meetings with an executive leadership team, and in those meetings we review things such as open vulnerabilities, any incidents that may have occurred, as well as other security-related topics. We have a cybersecurity governance committee that meets and reviews any newly proposed policies or changes to existing FirstEnergy security policies. And as an example of some of the things that we cover in that meeting, if we were to have a proposed change to our foreign travel policy with FirstEnergy equipment, that would get reviewed in that meeting and then either subsequently approved or rejected. FirstEnergy conducts vulnerability and penetration tests both internally and utilizing third-party vendors to exercise those tests. The results of the assessments are analyzed and then processed through our vulnerability management program to assign a risk rating to anything that gets identified and then take any appropriate mitigation steps. The starting point for FirstEnergy cybersecurity program are our policies, the standards that go along with them, and any related procedures. At the very top there, you see that we have an overarching cybersecurity policy that then relates to any of the underlying policies. Those underlying policies cover areas such as access control, encryption, software security, and personnel. Under each of the policies, there are any applicable standards and procedures that our employees must abide by as they implement and maintain any of our systems. FirstEnergy is a strong believer in having an effective cybersecurity education program. We require that all employees and contractors that have access to FirstEnergy systems take a cybersecurity awareness training on an annual basis. This includes an overview of our cybersecurity policies so that they know where to go to look at the policies so that they can understand what is permitted and what is not. The content for these training programs is reviewed and refreshed on an annual basis as well. And personnel that have access to any NERC, SIP, or critical infrastructure protection systems are required to take additional SIP training. FirstEnergy conducts monthly phishing tests with anyone that has access to a FirstEnergy email account. The results of those monthly campaigns are then reviewed in our monthly cybersecurity meeting with management. We publish multiple articles in our internal newsletter. That goes out across the entire company. We cover topics related to things such as email phishing, high-risk browsing, and other threats that are in the news, such as any pertinent cyber attack campaigns. Many of our cybersecurity team members hold their CISSP certification or Certified Information System Security Professional, and our cybersecurity teams stay current on the latest technology and threats by attending various conferences and training. We're very engaged with multiple external organizations such as the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, the Edison Electric Institute, or EEI, and the North American Transmission Forum. As I mentioned earlier, FirstEnergy has a formal vulnerability management program in place. The program includes receiving notifications of patches and other security vulnerabilities from services we subscribe to, as well as any information sharing programs that we participate in. We also track any findings from our internal and external vulnerability scans, as well as results of any third-party public testing that's done on our systems. Once information is received regarding a vulnerability, it's reviewed and confirmed that it's applicable to an FE system. We then assign it a FirstEnergy risk rating, and based on that rating, a mitigation plan is created, and the implementation of any mitigation steps is tracked all the way through to completion. Vulnerabilities are reviewed, including mitigation progress during our monthly cybersecurity management meeting. We have a formal process in place to review any new or updated technologies that are being considered for implementation in FirstEnergy's environment. Cybersecurity and other disciplines within the organization review proposals to ensure potential solutions follow standards and policies prior to their implementation. Our supply chain organization has standard terms and conditions that include language which supports and requires cybersecurity policy compliance for services and contractors. FirstEnergy requires that our vendors and contractors adhere to all of our internal policies that govern things like connectivity and access requirements, as well as acceptable use for FirstEnergy systems and data. These systems that are reviewed include any of our industrial control systems that are being considered for deployment in the field. FirstEnergy has long subscribed to the defense in depth strategy for cybersecurity. Every layer adds more protection, making it more difficult for an attacker to accomplish any of their goals. These layers include strong, well-established policies, standards, and procedures covering all aspects of our operations, including device baselines for hardening, acceptable network use, background checks on employees, contractors, and vendors. We also limit access to systems and applications based on the theory of least privilege. If they don't need access to a system or a portion of the system, then they don't get it. Our defense in depth strategy for perimeter and internal defenses includes other technical controls, including strong user authentication, physical protection for systems and network segmentation, as well as monitoring and logging. These defenses are key. On an average day, FirstEnergy sees over 117,000 cybersecurity threats, which is more than 1 per second. Of those threats, on a typical day, 5 require detailed investigation by our cybersecurity staff. FirstEnergy maintains a cybersecurity incident response plan to ensure that cybersecurity incidents potentially affecting systems are identified, contained, eradicated, recovered from, and then documented. Once an event is detected, procedures are followed, and if necessary, the incident response procedure is invoked. The incident procedure includes communication to appropriate management within cybersecurity and departments across the entire company. Corporate communications, external affairs, and our emergency operations center would be engaged and provide appropriate communication to the PUC, similar to storm and outage response, as well as any media response that was deemed necessary. FirstEnergy maintains redundant phone systems using multiple technologies, redundant data centers, and redundant network connectivity. The incident response plan is practiced several times a year with events such as internal tabletop exercises, the NERC GridX exercise, PJM's cybersecurity exercise, and Cyber Shield exercises with the National Guard units from multiple states. These exercises include scenarios that include very sophisticated, coordinated attacks on FirstEnergy systems. Cybersecurity reviews all the incidents that occur with our management team during this monthly cybersecurity meeting. And we review to make sure that our responses were appropriate, effective, and timely. So in conclusion, a comprehensive program is needed in order to effectively protect any of the systems that an electric utility takes advantage of. There is no one-size-fits-all magic solution that you can implement. It really does require that comprehensive program. And each portion of a cybersecurity program needs to be kept current and exercised to make sure that it's being updated as technologies change and the environment evolves. Thank you.
Jeff?
Thank you. My name is Jeff Fuller. I am the Director of Infrastructure Security for U.S. Operations for AES. I'd like to thank the Commission for a chance to go over our security presentation. And I would like to take a moment to introduce in the back Scott Goodhart. Scott Goodhart is the CISO with AES Corporation based in Arlington, Virginia. For my presentation, wanted to talk a little bit different in the way that we address our security and that we look at it as a holistic infrastructure security operation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our security operations and, I'm going to talk a little bit about how AES is put together and then how that relates into our security operations. And then for AES U.S. operations, we interwove our NERC CIP compliance programs into the overall security operations. So as I go through this, you'll see where these ties kind of come in for us. Obviously, just very quickly, we have the critical infrastructure, our presidential orders. AES takes these very, very seriously. We've built many of our operations around, beginning with the presidential orders. We leverage FERC CEII information protection as part of our overall data protection, as well as obviously as the NERC critical infrastructure standards. So a little bit very quickly about AES. AES is a global organization. We have presence in 17 countries. U.S. operations is based out of Indianapolis. As I get into the security operations, what we refer to as our Intelligence Security Operations Center is located in Indianapolis. Across the fleet for AES in the U.S., we have what I would consider standard generation coal, natural gas. We have a heavy presence in solar and wind. And really the only area we don't get into is the nuclear side. All of these data flows, though, as we start talking about our industrial control systems and where this data is coming to, is all going to be monitored out of the AES Indianapolis location. Within the U.S., we have a little over 3,000 people. We have 2 utilities, so we have DPL, obviously, as a matter of concern here. We also have Indianapolis Power and Light, and I won't beat up the statistics here. They're pretty straightforward. Get to the good stuff, right? So from a security operations perspective, we really address this in a very holistic fashion. We have the physical security side, right? So we have the traditional guns, gates, and guards, and the investigations that go along with that. We employ both full-time FTE physical security people as well as obviously contract security, especially at the plant environments. We have our cybersecurity side. Cybersecurity, we have specific security analysts and engineers, network security engineers. And then we break that into 2 pieces, if you will. We have what I would call the traditional enterprise side of the house, and then we have the ICS, or the industrial control system, the SCADA side of the house. These folks sit side by side, as we'll see here in a moment, but they're obviously very specialized. And we'll talk about the defense in depth here in a moment. I think we can't have any security discussion without talking about NERC CIP a little bit. We'll have another slide coming up. But from an AES framework perspective, we talk about NIST, we talk about some of the ISO standards and things like that. But for us in the electric sector, we build our frameworks around the CIP standards, specifically, obviously, for the ICS environments. But then as we've built up into the enterprise, we've used that same framework and a lot of those same requirements onto the enterprise side of the network. And those that are familiar with the CIP requirements understand that really puts a heavier burden on the framework and the reviews and the monitoring and those things that traditionally you don't see in a lot of the enterprise type of networks. Similarly to FirstEnergy, we have skills across the board. From an operator level, when we talk about the SOC operations, through our security analysts that are often our generalist type of folks, into very specialized people. We have a number of CISSPs on board. We have one to date, CCIE, or a Cisco engineer that also functions as our network security engineer, and then pretty much everything in between. We have a very, very strong training program, an education program. These skills have to be refreshed on a regular basis. It's just the nature of the beast. So baked into pretty much every one of those people development plans are some type of yearly or ongoing training program to update those skills. Our security, as I mentioned, we refer to as our Security Operations Center as an ISOC, or an intelligence-based Security Operations Center. As I get into a couple of the other slides coming up, it'll make a little more sense. But we bake our threat intelligence program and our vulnerability intelligence and assessment program into the ISOC. I know a few of you have had the chance to come to Indianapolis and see the operation. So literally where the ISOC sits, and this is some of the pictures inside, we have operators that sit there. Then right outside of there are the security analysts that are doing the day-to-day support for the operations that are happening there. So the interaction is very, very tight. We do have, again, in Indianapolis, what we refer to as the primary ISOC. In DPL, at the Dayton Service Building, we have our backup location. Again, some of you have seen that operation. I'm happy to say that's the old operation now. When you come back and revisit us at some point, we have recently rebuilt that out into a new, larger area to support some of the global operations that the ISOC has recently taken on as well. So a lot of new cool stuff for our operators to work with. The Dayton operation, though, is not 24/7. That is supported in Indianapolis. It is manned on a 40-hour work week during what we call the normal business hours, and then it falls back to a warm site that's fully available and if needed, is operational literally at the drop of a hat or as quick as we can get an operator in there. Oops, there we go. Within the ISOC operators live on what we call a crisis communication matrix. Obviously, we have all different kind of events that come through. Some events are more important than others. You know, a standard phishing email gets one level versus a virus that infects a single machine versus a virus that may infect many versus some other type of activity that might happen within the network. The operators very quickly, though, can triage the event and then implement the crisis matrix so that we get the right people at the table at the right time. Going back, for those that have been around in this area a little while, you may recall a year ago, New Year's Eve, the federal government was kind enough to release a bunch of what we call IOCs, or indicators of compromise, to the electric industry. And when organizations like mine, I'm sure, and Stan's and Scott's started picking up on some of those, we found that we were getting lots of events generated because of those. And as it turned out, our government partners might not have cleared those IOCs as well as they should, but for a short period of time on New Year's Eve, it sent our crisis communication up to that level 4, where it was an all hands on deck, and literally everybody was in trying to figure out what our government partners had supplied to us. So it's the point being, even on or in that type of environment, we can very quickly react to whatever those events might be. Within our threat intelligence program, we do what we call DIBs, or daily intelligence briefs. So these are a collection of, could be events, either internal or external, notifications from our government partners, from the EISAC. But these are put together so that there is an awareness amongst the whole operations team on what's going on. And these cover both cyber events, they cover physical events, they cover, it could be weather events. If the service operations team is getting ready to stand up because of a storm incident or the heavy snow that we may get tomorrow. These are all covered in the DIBs so that the full operation team has an awareness to what's taking place. The DIBs are kind of a one-way only thing. They happen at a certain time every morning, and then if there's follow-ups needed, then those are set up. We also do what we call threat intelligence bulletins. These typically are based on any of the information we may get. All right, so we have a threat hunt group that spends time digging through networks and digging through dark places on the web. They may come up with something. The ISAC may release some zero-day information. So these are all packaged and then sent out amongst the team. And I should qualify here, one of the differences for us is that being a global company, excuse me, we have assets around the world, and Scott manages the structure so that even though this is located in the U.S., as part of the overall global business, these threat intelligence bulletins that we're generating are going out to all of our business. So we're not just focused here in the U.S. I am, for the most part, but Scott's got that whole realm of responsibility around the globe. So we don't want an infection that happens in Brazil to somehow find its way into one of our U.S. operations. And then and I should say when, we have incidents, then we follow those up with our incident briefs, right? We want to understand the lessons learned. Is there something we could have done better? Is there some way we could have changed it up so we have a stronger or a different posture? We also leverage our information data protection. We have 4 levels of information data protection. Very quickly, in jumping topics slightly, because there's a note here on cloud hosting, right? So cloud availability is becoming mainstream. NERC CIP today still doesn't really allow for cloud hosting, the way the standards are put together, but a lot of our other business data are now becoming cloud-based or involved with the cloud. So we as AES leverage our information data protection standards internally to determine how we're going to deal with cloud and data in general. So very quickly, at the bottom, we have public. Public is what it sounds like. We're not terribly concerned. This is something we may put on a web page anyways. Internal information, this is like email addresses and address books, things we'd rather not have out in the public, but it's not going to break as if we do. But then the next two are the most important, right? So we have confidential and then we have restricted. And at the end of the day, the biggest difference between the two is, can it be released at all, or does it have to stay in-house and not be released? So confidential information with the proper NDAs and the proper protections and frameworks, for example, FedRAMP, if we're talking about cloud, as long as those are in place, then we can do that and we can have that information stored elsewhere. But if we've labeled it confidential, think NERC CIP data, then that data has to remain on-prem. We don't allow that data physically or logically, whatever form it's existing in, to leave premise. Physical security, again, we're a very holistic organization. As we approach, we have what we refer to as layered defense in the substations. And I include this, I should back up for just a second. I include this because with the data automations that we're looking at, and now we're looking into the substations and how those substations are going to be conveying our data back to the data centers, I think it's very important to make sure that we address where we may have a physical hole in the networks. So a couple here on substations. We employ a layered defense system. As you're familiar with a substation layout, the outer perimeter fence, typically just a padlock type of thing, but we use a technology inside that allows us to monitor up to those fence lines. So to incorporate with our security, we have a safety and security call-in procedure for our crews in the field that literally before they can open that gate, they have to call into the ISOC. They let the operators know who they are, what they're doing. From a safety perspective, they let them know about how long they're going to be in the substation, so all that information's logged. And then the operators will allow them to enter the substation. Typically, the control building has another layer of defense. We heavily use access control. And then once we get into the control building, I'll talk about that in just a moment. Where was I going with that? Oh, and then all of our substations are obviously backed up with camera systems for visual investigations. I include this one on the physical side. This one kind of plays on both sides of the house. We use a service that allows us to do real-time monitoring. Basically what this service does is once we've inputted all of our locations, it monitors social media, news feeds, all these types of things so that we get near real-time event information so that we can manage our crews in the field. For example, I'm going to jump to Indiana very quickly because our area of operation there is very metropolitan and very tight. It's not unusual for an incident, if I'm on the physical side, to have some type of crime activity happening near one of our crews. And so our operators are very quickly able to get that feed, check to see if we have a crew in the area, and then if there are crews in the area, we can have them shelter in place or we can have them evacuate the area depending on what the incident is. And then we have this thing called substation in a box, or an ESP in a box. So when we're dealing with our substations, kind of going back to the cyber side now, where we have logical, again going to NERC SIP terms, external routable connections outside of the substation, we use this substation ESP in a box, which is a firewall and IPS unit that encrypts all the traffic coming back to the data centers. And then that's controlled specifically as like an island unto itself within the control building, has its own cooling supply and what have you, and has its own separate card reader and alarm system and camera system to back it up outside of all the other stuff around the substation. So if we think about a lot of the NERC scenarios on how someone, a bad actor, may attempt to get onto a network, a lot of those involve getting into a remote location like a substation, and then they'll be able to plant or access either a switch or a firewall or something like that. So this is our approach to island off that type of scenario. Cybersecurity specifically now. And I think probably when Stan stands up here and talks, he's going to say some of the same things about defense in depth that Scott said and that I'm going to say. So we have multiple layers starting at the outside perimeters. Moving in, we utilize multiple technologies for both malware, for data loss prevention. We have multiple layers of IPS systems. So if we think about the very outside perimeter, we have a firewall and IPS. And then as you come within the network into a segmented network, thank you, we have additional firewalls and IPS units. So we're layered as you come in. And then even into the data centers themselves, they have separate firewall and IPS units. In the ICS side of the house, these networks are wholly segregated from the enterprise networks. There are no direct routable connections between the enterprise and an ICS network. We do not allow USBs, DVDs, or any type of internet access from or to the ICS networks. All those have to go through what we refer to as a bridge server. This bridge server employs what we refer to as a protocol break going from the enterprise network to the ICS network. Vulnerability management. Now this is a combination of both our, what I refer to as the enterprise side as well as the ICS side, but our workstations are scanned on a 30-day cycle, I should say workstations and servers, and the public-facing side is scanned every 2 weeks. We utilize two different services to do these scans. Not that we want to think that one service is necessarily better than the other, but it's similar like comparing your malware companies, your McAfee's versus Symantec, right? Sometimes one picks up one that the other doesn't. So our approach is if I use multiple, then I've got an extra layer of trust or confidence at least that my technologies are doing the job I need. Patch management, as part of the vulnerability management, I think it's pretty well recognized that patching is typically one of the higher vulnerabilities and weighs in. Of course, in the ICS environment, it's much more difficult to patch. And I say ICS in general, right? We're talking about ICS and DCS on the generation side. So that network segregation becomes that much more important because traditionally I may not be able to patch on that 30-day cycle that I would like to. It might be a 6-month cycle as it relates to a generator running. Security monitoring, Within our SIM in Indianapolis, we're doing somewhere, and you can see there, around 500 million events every 24 hours. Bear in mind, this is a global SIM as well, so it's not just pulling in U.S. operations. We're pulling in events from around the globe for us. But even despite all the number of events, this typically gets boiled down to, in this case, around 40-ish events. And again, these events can be very benign. These could be someone tried to click a phishing link, and our technology stopped the link from initiating, to someone actually plugged a USB in that may have had a virus on it or something like that. Excuse me. I mentioned that we have a dedicated threat intelligence program. This program is designed to try, and I stress that, try to keep us one step ahead. I think in many cases, this is not something we can truly do. I think it goes back to what Scott mentioned earlier, is there's not a silver bullet. There's no one size fits all. So our threat intelligence program is designed to try, and I stress that because I don't want to be the guy that says, oh yeah, we missed, right? But I have a high level of confidence in what our analysts are putting together and the work that we're doing. And finally, I think I'm almost finally, we maintain a really strong relationship with a number of public and private entities. We use a couple different in-house technologies that are associated with software as a service from a threat intelligence and a awareness perspective. And then we're also pretty tight with our DHS partners, even though they've sometimes misled us. We still maintain a solid relationship with them, and our relationship with the EISAC is extremely strong. From a compliance perspective, very quickly, I mentioned from our perspective, all these are interwoven. When we talk about the ISOC and the operators and analysts in the ISOC, we really have that physical side, we have the cyber side, and then interwoven across those, we have primarily our NERC CIP compliance that's being managed through the event analysis within the ISOC. From a compliance perspective, and specifically around the ICS networks, I mentioned that we maintain that segregation. For each ICS network or DCS network, a generation network, they have, for example, their own firewalls, their own IPS units, their own antivirus, their own file monitoring systems, their own data loss prevention systems, so they're 100% segregated for each one of those. Won't beat up NERC CIP. I think probably everybody has seen that one. I am happy to report that in 2017, DPL went through their full-blown NERC CIP audit, and they had zero, what they now refer to as potential non-compliance. For an ongoing compliance, or what we refer to as ongoing compliance, we perform internally annual penetration tests, and then we also go to the outside and we employ a third party to perform a penetration test. And typically the direction in the statement of work is to attempt to passively map one of our ICS environments, with the idea that from the outside, and we gradually allow them some access on the inside, to attempt to get to or through the outer protection perimeter for the ICS environments. And really what that's allowing us to gauge is what the defensive posture and what vulnerabilities we may have completely from the outside to the in. From a training and awareness perspective, we have annual training, we do monthly training, we have a monthly phishing exercise that takes place, we have quarterly newsletters, we have rotating security messages on all of our bulletin, what we call bulletin TVs. Where was I going with that? And at the end, someone almost always asks, you know, where's the vulnerability? Where's the weakness, right? And as we go through these, she already beat me to it. The technologies overall are pretty sound. You can have misconfigurations, you can have mispatches and things like that, but it's really people, right? It's our people that are going to attempt to click the link. It's our people that are going to find that they're not on an authorized USB list, and so I'm going to try to find some way to get around that USB device and use something else. And they're not necessarily trying to do anything malicious. They're trying to do their day-to-day work, but from a security perspective, they cause us our challenges. Very quickly, in summary, both on a physical and a cyber side, we employ layers and layers of defense. I think Scott said it best a few minutes ago. There's not necessarily a silver bullet, but we have multiple layers, we have multiple segmentations. I think we have historically shown, utilizing third-party penetration testing, that while sometimes you can poke and prod and find a vulnerability here or there, you cannot successfully transverse from the outside world to what I consider our crown jewels, or the inside world. And with that, we'll turn it to questions.
Jeff, thank you very much. We'll hear from Stan, and then we'll ask and have questions hopefully answered on a collective basis. Thank you. Stan?
Members of the Commission and Chairman Hawk, thank you so much for the opportunity to come and speak with you today about our security program. My name is Stan Partlow. I'm the Chief Security Officer for American Electric Power. And like Jeff, I lead a converged organization. So about 2.5 years ago, we joined our physical and cyber group together into one organization that reports to me as the Chief Security Officer. I report directly to the General Counsel. So I'd like to share a little bit of our program with you, and I'll try not to be too redundant, but my esteemed colleagues have talked about a lot of the things that we do at American Electric Power and AEP Ohio, so I will try not to be redundant. So I wanted to talk with you a little bit today about our enterprise organization and a little bit about something that we think is a little bit unique, in that we've actually partnered with our enterprise risk group to create a security heat map that then rolls into our larger enterprise risk heat map. We'll talk about the threat landscape, and you've heard Scott and Jeff talk a little bit about that, and our threat sharing program, and then our third-party risk program. So you know us as AEP Ohio, but we're in 11 states, spanning from really from Virginia all the way to Texas, and we actually run one network to support all of that. It's heavily segmented for security purposes, but one of the advantages that we believe we find with that approach is that when we employ security tools, we only have to buy them once. And from our perspective, all boats rise on the tide. So the investments that we've made in our corporate system help every one of our operating companies and every one of our business units be more secure. The other thing that's kind of interesting about our footprint, being in 11 different states, is that when you think about this from a regulatory perspective, it's really our goal to develop the right relationships with commissioners such as yourself, so that there is no need to have additional regulation. Jeff walked you through some of the regulations that we already have to follow on the federal level from NERC-CIP. You can imagine that for a company like ours, following independent state regulations 11 times could be pretty difficult, and probably doesn't really advance the security posture very much. So we recognize as well that we can't do this job ourselves as a security organization, so we really have to enlist every single person in the company to help us keep AEP safe and secure. So this is our motto. We talk a lot about this in various settings. Jeff and Scott described some of the things that they do from an awareness perspective. We do very similar things, phishing campaigns and newsletters. One of the things that we've done that I think is a little bit unique is we have a group we call Security Champions. We have over 200 of them now that actually come from all the business units within our company across the enterprise, and they've expressed an interest in security. And we now have co-opted them and really made them our ambassadors back to their individual business units. We have a monthly meeting with them. We share intelligence information with them. We share training opportunities with them. We give them materials that they can go use back in the workplace to try to help further drive those security messages. Because as you heard Jeff say, at the end of the day, we can put all the controls in place, but sometimes the weakest link is really that person behind the mouse. So we want to do everything we can to make sure that we're properly supporting them. You all have seen this. This is what we look at every day when we think about what the world looks like, both from a cyber and a physical perspective. So one of the things we tried to think about is, get beyond the theoretical, and there's a lot of people out there that can come up with a lot of doomsday scenarios that we could try to protect ourselves against. We tried really to focus on what was real, what was happening out there in the world. And so as a result, we worked with our enterprise risk group, and we actually mapped what we thought were the most likely scenarios to happen to our company, and those bubbles, if you will, on the risk heat map represent both physical and cyber threats. So what are the most likely things that could happen to us? This is a little bit different than vulnerability management because this takes an attack in total. Instead of focusing on that one particular vulnerability, we're trying to think about this attack from beginning to end. Not only the attack itself, how would they get in the house, but what damage did they do while they're there, and how would we ultimately recover from that? So we took that list that you saw on the last page and try to boil that down into what we thought were the most likely scenarios, and then we've mapped those. And the reason that I think this is going to be important for us going forward is as we continue to make investments in our program, what I'm hoping to be able to do is show some return on investment by being able to move those bubbles down and to the left. Get them into the yellow and the green zone because of either a new strategy that we've taken from a protection standpoint, or in some cases it may be a recovery strategy, a resiliency strategy. How quickly can we recover from that particular attack? As we think about threats, not unlike what you heard Scott and Jeff talk about, we're looking across the spectrum from a threat landscape perspective, including insiders, both witting and unwitting. And what I mean by unwitting, those are the folks that get compromised in some of those email phishing campaigns where their credentials are harvested and all of a sudden the threat actor becomes them. That's a pretty dangerous spot to be in because they have access to the system. They already have the keys to the kingdom, if you will, and depending upon who is compromised could really create some problems, particularly those super users, the administrative accounts, the folks that are doing that high-level work that might have extra ability to impact one of our systems. So we look at that from someone who might be a disgruntled employee and also someone who might have had their credentials harvested. We're definitely thinking about the advanced persistent threat, the nation state type attacks. And you heard Scott and Jeff both talk about relationships that we have with the government. We rely on them heavily to try to help us understand what's happening in our space relative to this particular threat. And we know that, that we as a grid, if you will, are going to be on someone's list somewhere around the world, so we have to constantly stay on our game. There are also people trying to carry out regular cyber crimes, get to our personally identifiable information, find a way to manipulate our financial accounts. So we have to be concerned about them as well. Most of those attacks are going to take place on our business network, but they are as real as the nation state attacks. So we know that there are lots of different types of adversaries out there. Physical threats, we're always concerned about that, all the way from the vandalism that might happen in a substation control yard to something as large as the Metcalf attack that it's hard for me to believe, I think, is getting ready to have its 5-year anniversary, right? 5 years ago, I think next month. So, a huge attack on a large transformers that to this day is unsolved. We still don't know the motivation. There's lots of theories out there, but we're concerned about that. We think about hacktivism from the perspective of people that may not agree with a company policy or even U.S. policy, and they may not really want financial gain, or they may not have a terrorist bent, but they want to send a message. And then there are the nuisance threats that we deal with that probably make up a large portion of that funnel diagram that Jeff showed you. We use the Cyberkill chain, and that's a tool that Lockheed Martin developed. Our goal is to stop these attacks before it gets down into the red zone. You heard both Scott and Jeff talk about there's no silver bullet, and we know that there are going to be people that are going to find a way to enter a foothold into our network. The better question is, how quickly can we detect them? and how quickly can we isolate them, and how quickly can we eliminate them and recover from that particular attack. So from our perspective, as you go down that list, we know there are people out there doing reconnaissance on us every day. We want to try to stop that when they start to get into the network and gain a foothold. But we know that there may be people that we set up this layer of defense for a reason. They may get past the first layer. So how quickly can we find them and eliminate them? Our goal is to make sure that they don't get to the command and control phase and the actions on objective. So if you think about it from a strategic perspective, our goal is to win every attack, and we believe we're going to win the attack if we can keep them from engaging in command and control and action on objective. If you think about the Ukraine attack, that went all the way to action on objective. They actually literally had, the threat actors had control of the devices, and they began to operate the breakers and create a power outage. So they got all the way to the bottom of the chain, and there was no opportunity for the cybersecurity team in that particular entity to stop them. So we want to win every attack. We recognize in order to do that, we've got to have some core principles around protecting our grid, protecting the business network, and you heard Jeff talk about the fact that the grid or our operational technology network is separated as best we can from that business network. We try not to let those two things touch, but we have sensitive data and important assets in both. So we can't ignore one in favor of the other. We have to be on our game every day to protect both of those. But the challenge that we all face, and it really goes into the reason I think you all commission this discussion, is how do we enable business optimization while protecting all of these assets? As Commissioner said at the beginning, or Chairman Hawk said at the beginning, we're in an age where the technology is moving literally at light speed. So how do we as security professionals figure out a way to find that balance? I'm a firm believer that life is a lot like the martial arts, and any martial art you can think of, the key component is balance. And that's really what we have to strive for, because from a security perspective, if we lock things down so much that we are totally secure, the business will not thrive, and all of those opportunities that we have to modernize our grid and use different technology will never play in that space. And then from a foundational perspective, we do build on our regulatory compliance program, not unlike what Jeff described to you. We definitely are discussing every day the excellence of our staff and making sure we're recruiting the right folks and maintaining them, training them, and making sure that as we have vacancies, we're filling them with the right people. In today's marketplace, I'll tell you, that's not an easy task. Cybersecurity professionals are in demand everywhere. One of the things that we've seen, though, is there are a number of people that have come to our organization that don't come here for the money. They come because they believe in the mission. They really believe in protecting the grid. They believe in keeping the lights on. So we're ecstatic that we have that level of staff. Not unlike what you heard from both Scott and Jeff, at the end of the day, our cyber intelligence and response center becomes the focal point for everything we do. So we put this diagram together to kind of describe for you how it works. On the left side are the inputs, all the things that we get from our government partners, from those third parties that you heard Jeff and Scott talk about that we engage with, from our peer utility companies. We're in a number of sharing groups where we get intelligence information that comes from this. Sometimes it's intelligence that comes from within the company. People see something and say something, which we encourage them to do, and they find some strange thing on their computer, or they see something that doesn't make sense to them and they report it to our 24/7 desk. We take that information and we really process it and analyze it, and the folks that run our 24/7 desk are empowered literally if they feel the need to unplug us from the internet to try to reduce the impact of a particular attack. So we've entrusted them. We use a system similar to what Jeff described to you to help them understand what action is appropriate at what level, but we don't want to have them paralyzed by having to go through 3 or 4 layers of approval before they can actually do something that could reduce the total impact of that particular attack. On the other side, we have outputs that are going all throughout our company, and information that we get that ends up going to our peer utility companies through the ISAC and the other sharing groups we're in, and to the government itself, to the FBI, DHS. And sometimes those things become enriched and come right back on the other side of the bow tie. So we'll send something, as an example, to DHS. They'll look at it. They'll take that information and play it against what they call the high side or the classified world, and they'll say, that's a pretty interesting thing. Let's see if we can enrich that intelligence product, and then they'll send it right back to the sector. And so all of us get to benefit from those things. And not unlike what you heard Scott talk about earlier, we built that on the NIST framework, which you see outlined at the bottom. So our Cyber Intelligence and Response Center is really a two-phased approach. The first one is our 24/7 desk, which is our Tier 1, and those folks are literally there 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, monitoring all the tool sets that we have, watching all of those inputs coming in. And as they see things that are more advanced, they hand them off to the Tier 2 team. And you heard Jeff talk a little bit about the hunting function. These are people that are out there looking for those proactive things. When you think about what malware versus zero-day means, malware is a very common thing that we all experience on our home computers, and it's pretty much managed by the antivirus that you have on your desktops or your servers. But as you move up the list into that zero-day arena, those are things that none of the antivirus vendors have seen yet. So there's no signature-based help, if you will, for those kind of things. So as much as we can, we have people dedicated to try to find those things and ensure that we then report them to the appropriate folks and make sure that we can then put the right mitigation strategies in play to prevent them from doing damage to us. On the physical security side, we look at physical security really as a safety issue, particularly in the substation arena. If you think about the scourge of copper theft and folks out there stealing copper grounds, it's not really an economic conversation in my mind as much as it is a safety conversation. Once they start compromising those grounds, they compromise the equipment. If a fault happens to come into that station, the fence, those pieces of equipment become energized, and our employees, along with the general public, could be injured by that. So we take that very seriously, and we try to focus on the safety aspects of that. You heard Jeff and Scott both talk about this idea of layered defense. The idea is deter, delay, detect, respond. So there are both physical security measures and cybersecurity measures that help us accomplish those. And you see some examples there of some of the things we do. From a distribution level, and one of the things that we're working on now is a tiered approach to our distribution level substations. You heard Jeff talk about the NERC-CIP standards. The NERC-CIP standards, from a physical security perspective, generally reside at the BES level, at the bulk electric system. So they're really normally going to be the transmission stations. Those same regulations don't apply to the distribution stations, but we also recognize a need to make sure that we're protecting those stations, particularly those key stations that might have a public safety nexus or serve a large number of customers, or certain key customers like the 911 call center. So what we've done is something very similar to what we've done for the BES substations, and created a menu of security measures that might allow us to match those up to a particular tier. One of the benefits of doing that is it gives us a standard for any new builds or any opportunity we have to expand a station. We know exactly what package we'd like to put in there. We can build that into our budget and move forward. Not unlike the slide you saw from Jeff, we have circles of trust with a number of different organizations. We meet actually every month with the FBI. We work constantly with DHS and the NKIC. We are also part of the EISAC, and I actually sit on the member executive committee, which is a kind of a group that tries to guide the development of the EISAC. We have several peer utility groups that we're in, where we share information back and forth with these gentlemen and others across the country. And then we're part of the Columbus Collaboratory, which is a kind of a unique event here in Columbus that is made up of 7 companies here in Columbus that are sharing cyber and cyber IT and security resources. We do something similar to what you saw Jeff describe with what we call the MIB, or the Morning Intelligence Brief. We do this a couple of times a week, and we'll have anywhere up to 100 or more people from all across the company that join in this conference call. As Jeff described, it's very one-way. We're pushing information out to them. Then they can call us back if they have particular questions or they want to provide additional information. We think this is a great way for us to make sure that we're engaging those other groups. It's really easy when you think think about, who's responsible for security, to lay that on the shoulders of the security team. But the reality is the security team very rarely controls all the issues related to security. So we have to rely on our operational technology engineers, and we have to rely on our IT partners, our network engineers, because that's not part of our security program, but it certainly impacts what we do. And so we want to make sure that we have the right relationships with those teams as we come up with vulnerabilities and plans to improve the security posture of our networks, that we have those folks dialed in and they understand what we're doing and we're operating as partners. So these calls have definitely helped us do that, because back in the day, in kind of our history, everything in the security realm was under a cloak, and we couldn't talk about anything even within our own company. And we realized pretty quickly that when we were going out and asking these folks to do something, and we couldn't tell them why, it was a non-starter most of the time, because they're like, okay, well, why should I do that? That's more work for me, and you really haven't given me any explanation as to why it's even important. So we're trying to invite as many of those folks into those conversations as we possibly can. And the last slide I have here for you is our third-party risk governance program. You heard both Scott and Jeff talk a little bit about this in their companies. We definitely recognize the vulnerabilities that are created by our relationships with third parties from a couple of perspectives. One, we ask first and foremost, do they have a need to connect into our network? And if they do, have we properly secured that? Number two, what kind of data are we passing to them? And can they appropriately protect it? One of our team members has a great analogy that he uses that I love, and I'll steal it from him. He said, thinking about the cloud with a third-party vendor is like you taking your most sensitive data that you own, walking next door, knocking on your neighbor's door, and handing it to them in a box. Do you trust them to protect it or not? And in reality, that's really what we're doing, right? We're giving our most sensitive data, in some cases, to someone outside of our control. So what kind of due diligence can we perform to make sure that we're satisfied that their security posture is at least similar to ours? So we have formed a cloud center of excellence, not unlike the two gentlemen you heard talk earlier, to try to understand the cloud. We understand that we are going to have to deal with the cloud. There's going to be a time where the days of us forcing people to hold things on-prem, as Jeff described, won't happen anymore, because the technology is changing. So we've got to figure out a way to get in front of that. But we don't want to do it without making sure we perform the proper due diligence. So our Cloud Center of Excellence has folks from all over the business, including security, as part of that group. And as we look at cloud opportunities that come through the door, we have it vetted by a number of people to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the company, and that neighbor is one that we can trust. So I thank you for your time, and I'll sit down and feel free to ask us questions as you see fit.
Stan, panelists, thank you very much. So just a brief statement about where I think, well, I'll just speak for myself, where my head is with regulation in the security space. And where my head is that I don't want to be prescribing standards or telling you what to do to protect your facilities. And you all know better than we do as to how to protect the consumers in your footprint from threats and vulnerabilities. So let me just get that out of the way. Okay, but Stan, you mentioned the Cloud Center of Excellence, and so clearly there's an acknowledgement from AEP's perspective that, in fact, the technology is advancing that will change sort of the business as usual piece of this. And so as the commission continues to analyze all things grid modernization, and we heard this morning 2 robust panels about the concept of data access and data sharing. Has there been any discussion just from a regulatory standpoint? Has there been any discussion with the lens towards security of anything that you're trying to do, or anything that you as you were planning for this advanced space, boy, I wish our regulators knew about X. I'm just curious, has anything come along? Because, let me just add one more factoid, which is you're right in that the NERC cyber and physical standards don't apply to the distribution system. They apply to the bulk power system. And so I'm just curious now about the interplay between there really are no, outside of maintaining reliable service and you all doing your absolute best to ensure that service remains reliable for consumers in your footprint. There really is, outside of your efforts, no definitive, thou shalt protect your physical assets by A, B, C type of standards. So just your thoughts about the evolving distribution system and your role and what our role should be in that.
Well, I think what we saw with the Ukraine attack was that we better pay more attention to the distribution system, quite frankly. I think, at least the initial attack was a distribution level attack. So we know that at least a threat actor out there has proven that they have the capability of doing that. And while that might not cause the cascading blackouts like it would if it had been an attack on the BES or the bulk electric system, to your point, we still have a responsibility to provide reliable service to our consumer base. And anyone that loses power anytime for any reason, it's a bad day for them, right? I mean, there's no good answer for that at all, and it impacts people's lives, and certainly that's why I think we're looking at it from the perspective, and I think Jeff mentioned it as well. We're not focusing on what we don't have to do because there's no regulation for it. We're focusing on what's the best practice and what makes sense, and so I think we're definitely committed to making sure that we have the same rigor around our distribution approach that we do on the BES side. So I think we're working toward that. And we're taking that opportunity anytime we can. One of the things that we looked at, quite frankly, was the DHS, it's been a couple of years ago, put out what they call their 7-step program for industrial control security. It's not a requirement. It's a group of best practice guidelines. So we actually looked at that and said, as we look at that, how does our distribution system stack up against that? And we found some issues that we wanted to improve, and we're in a process right now of doing that. As far as the cloud goes, I think the cloud is going to be one of those decisions that all of us are going to have to make based upon the business need and weighing it, again, trying to find that balance point, weighing it against the security need. There are some opportunities. You heard Jeff talk a little bit about FedRAMP. Even the federal government uses the cloud. There certainly are some opportunities to figure out a way to use the cloud in a somewhat secure fashion. There are ways to create your own cloud and host it within your own data center, which at least gives you more control over your neighbor than you might have if you're giving it to them. And then you've got, I think, a function of some of those companies are almost too big to fail. When you're dealing with the huge companies, at least I'd like to think your risk level would be lower with some of those organizations than it would be with some of the smaller vendors. So I think that's where, our third-party risk governance program has to really step up and say, let's go ask the right questions. There's actually a separate set of questions that are part of that process that are strictly cloud-based, and may even get to the point where we're doing a physical walk down of their facility to understand how they're protecting the data center from a physical security perspective, along with the answers from the cybersecurity perspective. But I think the days of just, as security folks throwing our hands in the air and saying we're not going to have cloud, those are over. So we've got to figure out a way to get in front of it.
Okay, very good. Anything else to add?
Yes, excuse me. So I've been on the NERC CIPSI for a long time, and recently took over as the policy chair on the subcommittee. And we've stood up a working task force today that is specifically addressing cloud from a NERC perspective. And I think from the working group, what we're going to see in the very near future is recommendations that will go through the NERC approval process on cloud and how to address cloud. That's still a long ways from the SIP standards themselves, but there is clear recognition commission and to Stan's point, the cloud is here to stay.
Yeah.
It's going to be. So then it's how do you do it and how do you do it right so that you have a level of confidence in your protection standards.
Hey, can I ask you this? Do you end up using a lot, or do you end up using any of lessons learned from NERC SIP standards, then applying that to the distribution system?
So we do, strictly from a DPL, let me speak in Ohio. On the distribution substations, we employ literally the same security measures that we're employing at the BES substations.
Okay.
I would echo that. At FirstEnergy, the programs, policies, the procedures that we put in place to ensure that we have compliance for NERC SIP at the transmission system level are pervasive across the organization. So they are also in use at those distribution locations, the distribution system itself. What is slightly different, right, is the gathering of evidence that you need to have to show compliance, but we're certainly garnering the benefit of utilizing, those rigid, structured processes and procedures to ensure the security of those locations.
Okay. Beth?
Thanks. These discussions always give me pause, but they also give me a little confidence because they seem so comprehensive the way you presented all the information on what you're doing to prevent cyber and physical attacks. And I'm just wondering, have you collaborated at all with other industries in terms of cyber and physical security that might have obviously data to protect, whether it's banking or insurance? Are there any other industries? Does that happen, or do you mostly just talk amongst yourselves in terms of the utility industry?
So I'll go with all the above. It's truly a matrix, right? So strictly from the utility perspective, the ISAC is that connection to the other ISACs from finance and health. But similar to Stan, we reach out to the local communities and the local businesses and partner with them. In Dayton specifically, we have a partnership with the University of Dayton, and we're launching a partnership with Sinclair Community College. And it's twofold, right? Part of it's information sharing and how do you do things with their cyber centers, and it's a learning opportunity for the universities to come back to us and see how the electric sectors work.
Similarly, at FirstEnergy, we participate in an effort called the Northeast Ohio Cybersecurity Consortium, and it's populated by businesses within Northeast Ohio, and it includes FirstEnergy, representatives from the banking industry, universities and colleges, professional sports teams, the list goes on, to provide that, somewhat different outlook on how they protect their systems and their information. We also, as I mentioned when I was presenting, participate heavily in an effort called Cyber Shield, where we work hand in hand with National Guard unit to go over and practice drill how to protect our industrial control systems that actually manage the grid and the distribution system.
At the highest level, the Electricity Sector Coordinating Council is now making an effort to coordinate with the communications sector and the finance sector. Really, if you think about it, particularly for electric sector and communications, we're gateway infrastructure. If our infrastructure doesn't work, no one else works. I think one of the things that we saw in GridX was that that exercise, if that ever happens, that's a very bad day for the world, because the way they crafted that exercise, everything fails. But it's a great informative operation or opportunity for us. But what we really realize is we have to be linked closer to the communications sector. And the reason that I say that is because a lot of the resiliency plans that we have, if the grid were to be compromised, is to be able to go back and try to operate in a more local mode. Well, that doesn't work if you don't have effective communication. So if the threat actors are able to compromise the cellular systems and our 800 megahertz radio systems and all that, it's very difficult for us to dispatch crews out there. So I think, to your point, we've recognized that we need to be better aligned all the way at the top where we interface with the government, and then, as you heard both Scott and Jeff talk about, all the way down to the local level. And for us, the collaboratory is really helpful because we've got banking, retail, healthcare in that group, and we actually share information with them. We kind of look at this as sort of the canary in the coal mine. What happens to one of our neighbors may very well happen to us next. And so we're all paying attention to that. And I think the information sharing over the last few years has gotten much, much better cross-sector. And it's very important that we do that.
Great, thank you.
Dan?
Christina, do you have? At the end of your remarks, Stan, you got closer to where I had been thinking about during the course of all the other presentations, which is the context of grid modernization and what we're directly involved with here. We have proposals in front of us, and we're considering doing things like encouraging the deployment of distribution, automation, circuit reconfiguration technologies and equipment, AMI, smart meters. We've heard from third parties and others who are interested in making available access to consumers the home area network devices and capabilities. So in this grid modernization effort, it appears to me, and I think to all of us, that there's going to be a lot of improvements and extension of the distribution system outward to enable it to operate more efficiently and to provide consumers with better experiences. And that what accompanies that is, it seems, is that there will be many more points of touch, of interconnect, of vulnerability for outsiders to get into the distribution system. So when you're listening, if you are listening to the proposals that are being made in this space, in the course of dealing with all the duties that you have, which are so much larger than simply grid modernization, are there any aspects of it, of the grid modernization area that cause you particular concern, that you, even though you're very practical, Stan and Scott and Jeff, and you recognize that this is coming and you can't just say no, are there particular aspects of it that cause you the greatest amount of concern in this space, and that you would say, hey, focus on this, be careful about this, or when you're crafting the balance, Commission, be aware of this particular vulnerability, and make sure that when you green light whatever it is that's involved to let it go forward, that you have it in mind, and that you warn us about what we need to be most concerned about. What is it that we should be most concerned about, that you're most concerned about in this space?
Well, my first and foremost concern is that we're involved. And I think it's a fair question for you to ask of us when you're looking at these projects. Was your security team involved in this discussion? And we've tried really hard to make sure that we've made the right connections within the business as they're bringing these projects forward, that we're on the front side, not on the back side. The traditional approach to security often has been it ends up being bolted on at the very end, and usually then lots of discussions have happened, and maybe commitments have been made and contracts have been signed, and someone says, maybe we should talk to the security folks. We are trying really hard to make sure we're plugged in at the very beginning of that conversation, because at the end of the day, there are ways to design much of this. I'm not smart enough to do it, but I have people that are definitely smart enough to do this. There are ways to design security into many of these modernization efforts, as long as we're brought in at the beginning. So I think it's a fair question for you to ask of the utility partners that, has your cybersecurity and physical security team been involved in looking at this technology and determining what that ultimate impact might be? The second thing I would say is, I think it's incumbent upon us to do a good job from a third-party risk review perspective of looking at the actual entities that are bringing this technology forward. A lot of the folks that are developing this are incredibly smart, bringing things to the market quickly. They have an entrepreneurial bent. They want to solve people's problems. Sometimes they don't always think about what those potential security risks should be. So if we're doing our job from a third-party risk perspective, we should be trying to help them. And we've been pretty successful in that area where we've been able to sit down with them and say, you know, you brought us this and we saw some gaps there, and we think if you do these two things, it can really shore up the security in this particular device, which then ultimately makes us more secure. So from my perspective, I think the issue is, you know, are the security teams really part of that process?
To that, I say amen. I couldn't agree more that it needs to be engineered with cybersecurity in mind up front. And I know it sounds perhaps like a textbook answer, but if you're following your program, and that is part of your process, is to review and make sure that you have effective cybersecurity controls in place up front, you will dramatically reduce the risk that you're going to have some unexpected outcome. And if you plan for it up front and make sure that you have controls in place to manage that environment, you're going to go a very long way to protecting the system and the customers.
So I'll echo the amen. Having us involved up front is huge. But I was having this conversation around grid modernization and where we're going, and I was asked, you know, at a very tactical operational level, where's Jeff's concern? And I thought about it for a little bit, and given the connectivity, it's this concept of going behind the meter, going into a business or a residence, right? And then connecting to all of their stuff, right? Whether it's the refrigerator or whether it's their HVAC or whatever that is. And then we're going to give that consumer access probably through some web interface to that stuff. And then where is the security that we no longer are involved with? Where is that security? So, you know, it's the vulnerabilities. Every day we're going to come up with a new one. And as we talk about the AMI and the data communications and my ESP in a box for my substation to that meter, I have a lot of confidence in the way we operate and the technologies we put forth and how we monitor all that. But once we go behind the meter, I don't know whatever that person or business is doing, and now where does that data flow and how do I control that, and will that at some point introduce a new vulnerability into my system that I have to try to find a way to manage?
Tom?
One of the questions that I had when I came in here was, you know, how much do these folks really communicate with one another? And I feel pretty confident that either through the EDUs, they communicate at least through maybe PJM in our case, and maybe Homeland Security, if not directly with one another. Is that pretty much true?
I think that's a fair statement. We're all involved in sharing groups. The industry has launched something called Cyber Mutual Assistance that I think at last count had well over 100 companies that represented about 80% of the customers in the United States that are part of that group. You heard us talk about the EISAC. That's our central information sharing. There are several other smaller groups that involve various people in the sector. And then we're constantly talking with our government partners. So I think it is fair that one of the things that, I'll be honest with you, I was very impressed with when I joined the electric sector was that there really is no competition in the security space. People are more than willing to share. They're more than willing to help each other. They're more than willing to lend a hand. And I know I have personal relationships with Jeff that go back many years. I don't know Scott well, but I believe in my heart that if I called either one of those on the way home today and said, hey, I've got a problem, they would drop what they're doing and try to help me, and certainly we would reciprocate. So I think it's a very collaborative environment within our security space across the board.
Mr. Chairman, the other question I wanted to mention was that I read this recently talking about, I think mostly cybersecurity, but the same would be true with physical security, that we're probably lucky that we have these different EDUs as opposed to like one. Or the article was talking about having the different states. But I just took it a little further, and within the state or within the, you folks are well outside the state. But we're probably, there's probably, or what do you think about that? I mean, are we better off as a nation, as a grid is concerned?
Absolutely.
Having these different...
We're a very heterogeneous grid, not a homogeneous one, and I think that's a huge piece of our defensive capability. When you go to foreign countries, oftentimes the government runs the grid, and it's one type of equipment, one type of design. If you looked at the three companies represented here, our EMS systems are all a little bit different. We use different equipment, so if the threat actors are able to compromise one particular brand, they may certainly impact a company or two or five, but they can't impact the entire grid. So I think that's absolutely one of the things that helps make our grid very resilient, because it is very heterogeneous. It's not a one-size-fits-all.
First of all, thank you, gentlemen. Sobering but comforting thoughts in terms of the amount of resources and effort you guys dedicate to cybersecurity. As we talk about grid modernization, we're talking about non-traditional parties maybe getting access to this new and reconfigured grid. And most of the efforts and the layers of security that you discussed today revolved around threats to your operational integrity. Here's a question for you. Do you ever think about the possibility of you being a conduit of malware that goes from a party through you to the residential consumer who's unsuspecting, particularly as we incorporate smart meter technology that can communicate inside the walls of a home?
So that's speaking exactly to my fear when we go behind the meter. That's opening a whole new realm that we've not even begun to really address. Literally, I had that thought and that conversation just a couple weeks ago. It's new for us, so it'll be something new for us to have to think about and how to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Kind of further on that point, and maybe just a specific question for Stan, and if you don't know, no big deal, but the access to real-time data for AEP Ohio is enabled through the Energy Bridge device. Is there a security component to that device so that other appliances are not connecting directly to the meter itself? Or do you know anything about that, at least at a high level?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I don't know that.
Thanks.
I'd like for you to get involved, Stan. Take a look at that.
Understand.
Wonderful panel. Thank you very much. Okay, we are on a 15-minute break. Thank you.